Now, you may be looking at the thumbnail right now and going, wait a minute, I thought AMD was good on Linux. And look, it is good on Linux, but there is a lot of things that are missing with the AMD drivers on Linux. Even though my RX 6700 that I got, if you look on the back of this box, you can see right here, you can see supported operating systems include Linux, Windows 7, and Windows 10. Now that might be a bit outdated, but the point is that on this box, it says that this GPU should work on Linux. But the thing is, that's just about it. It's just going to work basically. When it comes to a lot of the premium features with AMD GPUs on Linux versus Windows, there is a lot missing. And that's what I wanted to talk about today is with the newest RDNA 4 GPUs releasing soon, to be able to buy one on like sometime like March 6, I think it is, or sometime, to look at what AMD could really improve on Linux and why, even though it says it supports Linux, really Linux users are being classed as second-class users, I would say, and not first-class users like the Windows users get with the Radeon drivers. So if you don't know, the RDNA 4 GPUs were announced and they are looking to be actual good GPUs so far with the 9070 and I think the 9070 XT have both been announced, and they are, like I said, they are looking to be good contenders, and the price is like what, like $50 cheaper or something versus Nvidia's 5070 and 5070 Super or whatever it's called. It's like $50 cheaper or something. So it might be a good sell when it comes to a Windows user. But what about a Linux user? When it comes to using AMD GPUs on Linux, it can actually be either really easy to just set up and start using, or it might be the opposite where you might see some random issues. And I'll go into the drivers with the AMD drivers on Linux and how over the time of me using it and seeing other people use AMD cards, there is an underlying issue here with how these drivers are supported. So like I just showed before, I do have a RX 6700 from Sapphire. As you can see, the Sapphire Pulse RX 6700 10GB model, and I've been using it for around a year and a half now on my computer. I got it for like, I think it was 400 or 399 AUD, which is pretty cheap when you convert it to US. I don't know how much it is in US, but I would know that it is pretty cheap price when I got it, you know, like a year and a half ago. And I've been absolutely enjoying it. When it comes to the problems that occur on a AMD Linux machine, it's not that bad, I would say. And when it comes to the ease of setting it up, of course, you just install the distro basically, and the kernel already has the driver pre-installed, which is the AMD GPU kernel driver. And then you have the Mesa or even Mesa, someone called it, which I really do like the name of pronouncing it like that. That is the user space graphics drivers for Vulkan and OpenGL. But that is about it, I would say, when it comes to those drivers. You can install them, they're already pre-installed. You can start playing games mostly on them, and you probably won't meet any major issues, and you'll probably see better performance when you verse it against Windows. But like I said, that is about it. You can use FSR, you'll probably be able to use FSR 4 on Linux if the game supports it natively through Proton. So you can't use some application like the Radeon application to apply FSR 4 or like FrameGen over a game. You can't do that on Linux. You can only do it if it's natively supported through Proton on the game. But when it comes to RDNA 4, these GPUs are supposed to run pretty well when it comes to Linux. Supposedly, the Mesa side of things, so the graphics side, like Vulkan and OpenGL with RDNA 4, is supposed to be ready when it comes to, you know, if you bought a RDNA 4 GPU day one, it should be able to work on the latest Mesa and kernel release, probably like kernel 6.14 and probably Mesa 25. But of course, we actually haven't gotten any of these GPUs yet. And when it comes to Hypr-rx, like Michael, for example, who does all the Linux blog posts, I would say, on Hypr-rx so much, and he's always up to date doing all different types of tests on a Linux desktop, we're going to have to wait for him to get a RX like 9070 or 9070 XT so then he can do those benchmarks to see, well, is it actually better when it comes to versing against Windows, and does he actually experience any major issues with the GPU? That's what we're gonna have to wait and see, because we can't take their word when it comes to, like, I'm pretty sure the Valve engineers and Mesa said that it was ready enough. So we're just gonna have to take their word for it and just like see if it's actually good on the launch day. But this is kind of a problem and kind of a good thing, how I mentioned that Valve is the one who is talking about it, because if you don't know, the majority of contributions come through developers like Valve's engineers who work on the Mesa stack with RADV, which is in Mesa for the AMD GPUs. So there isn't many actual AMD developers really working on this per se. The majority that I'm seeing most of the time is coming from the Valve engineers, and it's like awesome to see that with a open source driver you can make it actually get to a point where it's better when it comes to its performance wise of things, and when it comes to it just like working properly, it is a lot better than the Radeon drivers. But the major thing that is missing with all of these drivers that are pre-installed on Linux is the Radeon software. So a lot of users actually do use this piece of software. I know there's a lot of Linux users who don't give a damn about this software. I personally do not give a damn about this software either, but I know there is a lot of people who actually want to use the software because they actually have some good tools in here. Like the first one is Radeon Chill that I'm seeing here. This piece of software is really good because what it does is it gives you a min FPS and max FPS. Then what it does is when, let's say, you're idle in a video game, it limits the FPS to whatever it thinks the FPS should be when you're idle in that game. So what does it do? Well, it reduces power consumption. It lowers the clock speed, which saves battery when it comes to if you have like a laptop, for example, that's running an AMD GPU. Well, this piece of software is really important, and I've seen it a couple times in my comments on my channel because they're like, well, I would really like this feature, but I burn battery faster on Linux because I don't have a feature like this where I can, you know, leave my game open and then it reduces the frame rate, which of course you can just like manually probably cap the FPS in the game or use something like Mango HUD, but having this feature already in like a whole like dashboard or like in settings, AMD settings application would be better if it was just already there for the user and they wouldn't have to use a third-party tool like Mango HUD or something. It would already be there for them. And I think the other point that I would like to make is about the ROCM support, which is used for all different types of compute workloads. One in particular is AI workloads. So running a bunch of AI models, ROCM is used for that on Linux and probably on Windows maybe also. But it also, like this post here, Michael asked if ROCM was going to be supported on the RX 9070 series, and it wasn't. Day one, it's not going to be supported on ROCM, which is really disappointing because there should be this type of support coming from AMD when it comes to an open source project that they've been trying to work on supposedly a lot and try and get more GPUs supported, even to the point where they're doing like a survey asking people what GPUs they would like to see supported, which of course you would try to support every single GPU as you can with that ROCM piece of software. But as we can see, RDNA 4 isn't going to be supported on launch day. So that's another point of where AMD kind of falls short is when it comes to like AI type of stuff using ROCM. It's, you know, like for me, I'm pretty sure my GPU is supported now, but yeah, launch date, you're not going to get it when you have a 9070 series GPU. And back to the Radeon software, things like Radeon anti-lag. This is a very popular feature that, well, on NVIDIA's side on Linux, NVIDIA Reflex is supported through Proton. You can use Reflex plus Boost on Linux on an NVIDIA card, and it works perfectly fine. I notice it when I'm playing like the finals, for example, because my RTX 2060 can't get enough FPS in the finals, so it feels kind of like laggy in a sense because there's lots more milliseconds with each frame. So I use the reflex software plus boost, and I get a rather decent experience. Not great, but it's better than not having something like that. So for some reason, even though it's not supported on Linux, there is a Vulkan extension that did come out not long ago. It was like a couple months ago, I'm pretty sure, and I remember posting this, and I was really excited about this being supported on Linux, and to the point where DXVK, which if you don't know is a translation layer that translates DirectX 8, 9, 10, 11 to Vulkan on Linux, so then you can play those games through Proton. And DXVK was going to support this Vulkan extension, and probably Mesa is probably going to support it also, so that it works properly. And for some reason, it was dropped because there was more important things to do. So that's quite interesting. Not even native games like CS2, for example, which does support Radeon's anti-lag, or like anti-lag 2 or whatever it's called, but on Linux it's not supported. So another point where AMD kind of lacks these important features, even though, like, look, it's right here in Vulkan documentation as a Vulkan extension, which can be used and implemented. It's taking a long time for these things to be, I mean, of course, this extension is probably going to be implemented at some point, but it's like, how long are we going to have to wait for this feature to be implemented? Is it going to take another 2 years for this to be implemented? Because there's a lot of people I already know who are going to just like comment throughout those couple of years saying like, where is anti-lag? I really like this feature. It makes my games feel more responsive, and like competitive games, for example. It's kind of odd how Valve is trying to make Linux better when it comes to gaming, but their native games like CS2 have major problems when it comes to FPS on like NVIDIA hardware. When it comes to WAYLAND support, there's a lot of things where it's like, why is this not being implemented now for a lot of the competitive people who want to try out Linux when it comes to like competitive gaming? They want to use a feature like anti-lag on their AMD card, but for some reason they're just not allowed to use it, even though there's a Vulkan extension. And when we go back to the Radeon software again, because there's more features that are just not included with these AMD drivers on Linux, and they probably should be. Another one is kind of like either lossless scaling or the AFMF, the fluid motion frames, which is basically just frame generation, but it includes a bunch more things that make the experience a lot more better if you want to use something like frame generation. And it's where you're able to basically apply this to a certain amount of games within your Radeon software, and you're able to just get it straight away. And this brings me into another feature, which is Hypr-rx, which applies profiles to games automatically within the Radeon software. You can decide what you want to have enabled in that profile, and it applies it on these games for you. Either it be anti-lag, or it be FSR, or it be some type of other, like say, Radeon-boost software, or FSR, for example, again, which boost, for example, it dynamically lowers resolution of the entire frame when fast on-screen character motion is detected by user input, allowing for higher FPS with little perceived impact to quality. This feature takes advantage of the variable rate shading hardware found on AMD Radeon RX 6000 and 7000 series graphics cards and supported DirectX 12 titles. So this is another one where this feature also isn't available on Linux at all. This is just a lot of little features within this Radeon software that just isn't available on Linux, and it's either you need to wait for it to become a Vulkan extension, and when it comes to something like when you want to apply like frame generation or maybe like FSR over it, like for example, Gamescope, which is a popular tool made by Valve, it allows you to apply FSR1 over your games automatically. So this is possible. You can do this, and things like sharpness as well. Someone else asked about that, and like I know that is possible. You can do it in Gamescope, even though it's FSR1, which is pretty old now and not great at all, I would say, when it comes to its quality. It's possible within their WAYLAND compositor. So all these features can actually happen. I bet you that if AMD focused on getting developers and actually just hiring them for Wayland improvement, or if Valve got more engineers to work on these things and trying to implement it into like the Wayland protocols, and then have like a Vulkan extension if needed, like anti-lag, and then a desktop environment like KD Plasma could implement it in the display settings. So then you can decide, like for example, like screen tearing. You go into display here, you can enable screen tearing in full screen windows. So it could be this similar thing like that, where maybe we don't need a Radeon software, maybe we could implement this natively within the desktop environment, and it's just up to the desktop environment if they want to implement that said feature. And I wanted to bring up the whole AMD experience because it's a lot of a mixture, where someone today, yesterday, and the day before was talking about an issue they had where their GPU was crashing whenever they tried to play games. He had an RX 5000 series GPU, RDNA 1, and his games were crashing. And I asked him, can you check your kernel logs? And it was a classic kernel log of a ring timeout, which has been shown across many AMD DRM issue posts, where people get these basically ring timeouts, which is literally just AMD resetting basically the driver in a sense, and then that's why the game crashes, because it's not able to solve the problem. And so this person had this issue on the finals and many other games, and he went back to Windows because he thought he just gave up because he didn't know how to fix it. And I myself didn't know how to fix it until someone suggested a thing called a VBIOS, which is something I've never heard of. And he said, oh, you should try updating your VBIOS on your AMD GPU card. And he was like, okay, I'll do it later. And he did it, reinstalled Linux to test out if the problem was there anymore, and it wasn't. So this is another where people do get these random ring timeout problems on the driver side, or the kernel driver side, and it just basically gives up and resets like the GPU, which can also interrupt other pieces of software, like the compositor, for example, can also crash. Multiple other things could crash because the AMD card's like, nope, I can't figure this out anymore. And so you get a rather bad experience until you learn something about VBIOS, which is something personally I've never heard of before. And so I updated my GPU also to the latest VBIOS version. I mean, I still don't have any major issues, but if you are someone who does have an AMD GPU, I would 100% look into updating your VBIOS firmware, because it might actually solve some of these issues that you've had, where you've gone, okay, I'm going to sell my GPU and get an NVIDIA card instead because I don't want to deal with these problems. Or if you've just been, experiencing it for the past, I don't know, years, months, or however long it may be. So my point with this video is that with RDNA 4 announced and the GPUs coming pretty soon, next month, I really would love to see AMD actually support Linux and not just stop treating it like a second class anymore, because Linux, it's grown. There is people who have switched over to Linux and built new PCs with AMD hardware and installed Linux, or people even who are running NVIDIA GPUs, because the NVIDIA drivers are also getting pretty damn good. And when it comes to the gaming side of things, if you're not playing kernel level anti-cheat games, you can enjoy Linux gaming, I would say, if you're able to at least understand how Proton works. You can have a good time on Linux nowadays, and there's distros like Bazzite that get that stuff up and running for you, or Nabara, or Picker OS, or even just using the mainstream distros like Fedora, or something like even just a basic distro like Linux Mint to get started with, so you can kind of just learn the ropes. Because, on the back of this, it says that Linux is supported, and that's the most important part, and it's literally on the first supported operating systems is Linux, then Windows 7, then Windows 10. That says something that AMD should be having a rather first-class experience on Linux when you install the GPU, and you should be able to get features that the Windows users get. So, if any AMD developers watching, which I really doubt there's any, focus on Linux a little bit more. That'd be really great. Even though the AMD drivers work extremely well when it comes to the out-of-box experience, there is important features when it comes to the gaming side of Linux with AMD. That stuff should be a top priority for you guys. And if you want more people to buy your GPUs, because I know the stock with AMD is around 10% right now, where NVIDIA is at like what, 80% or like 90%. It's basically like the whole Linux versus Windows market share thing where Nvidia is just, gone basically. Even though they've dropped recently in market share, AMD is way lower, and then Intel's like gone. They're like literally zero right now, while AMD is like chilling at 10%, but they could be way lower. So seriously, AMD, you need to improve your GPU drivers, and not just that, features on Linux, not just Windows, to get more people to buy AMD cards. Because without that support, which Nvidia, I would say, is actually doing a better job when it comes to the Wayland side of things. They've actually catched up and they've added more support when it comes to their own technology that they use, which is wild because Nvidia just like a year ago wasn't really that great on Wayland, and now it's basically almost on par. The only thing left is like VKD 3D performance and maybe some like other features. But when it comes to like AMD versus Nvidia, Nvidia has more features when it comes to like reflex, frame generation, like all that stuff has already been ironed out. And when it comes to like ray tracing also, and then when it comes to AI stuff, Nvidia does a better job when it comes to using those GPUs on Linux versus AMD, which AMD is kind of just like, you just want to use it for gaming and maybe some light AI stuff and like maybe some like light encoding like what I'm doing right now. And like, that's basically it. So, well, that's my conclusion with this video. If you guys also have your own opinions about AMD on Linux, I would really like to know about them because in my personal experience, look, I really enjoy using AMD on Linux, but I understand where, other people, are suggesting wanting these features, sometimes maybe even needing these features because they've used them so long on Windows and they really want to use them on Linux. So again, I'd like to know your thoughts. Definitely give a like on this video if you guys enjoyed it. You definitely can subscribe to the channel also, and thank you to my supporters. I'll show a text moving across the screen of all of you guys. They're giving me money every single month. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.